Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. In the early days of this podcast, I began by bringing in patrol officers and asking them a series of about 25 questions covering all aspects of their patrol experience. From that initial batch of interviews, I would then pick a topic, stitch together the responses of several officers, and create compilation bonus episodes that I called First-Hand Accounts. You can still listen to these episodes. They are bonus episodes numbers 2, 3, 5, 9, and 11. They cover everything from fighting suspects to working holidays to the worst police car they ever had to drive. Well, it's been about 3 years since I've produced any of those first-hand account episodes, and I've been promising that I would interview a batch of detectives and do the whole process over again. That's a lot of work. That project has been delayed several times, but it is finally starting to come together, and I wanted to give you a small down payment on what is developing. Specifically, one of the questions I'm asking these detectives is, what is your big story? Well, here are a couple examples of their big story.
Okay, I was a detective in Independence, Missouri, from around 2005 through 2017.
I was a detective in the Portland metro area from 2010 to 2023.
Pastor Love. This was back in 2010.
That's actually his name. That wasn't like a moniker.
David Love.
That was his actual name is David. His family name is Love.
Pastor David Love. Teresa, Randy's wife, and Pastor Love's love interest, finds Randy's body in the insurance rate, calls 911. Officers get there. Pastor Love shows up later on. And so as they're processing the scene, getting things done, they get Teresa in the patrol car, going to take her to the station. Pastor Love is pretty insistent that he goes along with them, that he's in the car a couple times. He's pretty adamant about going. The officer said, no, you can't go. And so he leaves. We interview Teresa. We still have no idea no one has any idea of what actually happened. Kind of ruled out a robbery pretty quickly because he had money. The victim had money in his pockets, and there was money on the desk, actually. He was killed with his own gun, as we said earlier. So during the course of that week, we're putting things together. The whole team of detectives are putting things together, and come to find out that perhaps we need to look outside of our scope here. So we go to the funeral, and Pastor Love was presiding over the funeral. Yeah. And we're thinking, and another detective, I know, we looked at each other and thought, that's our guy. That's our guy.
Why? What about, so you have a dead insurance agent.
We have a dead insurance agent.
And it's suspicious. It doesn't seem to be a robbery. But you go to the funeral. Why the pastor? Why did that stand out to you?
Initially, because as we talked to Teresa Stone, Randy's
the widow
wife, she kept giving more and more information about how she was connected with the pastor, and that something had
too connected.
Yeah, and she admitted to having an intimate affair with him.
Oh my, okay.
And so, Well,
surely if you rule out, if it doesn't seem to be a robbery, usually the significant other is high on the list. So you were looking at her.
Didn't take long to get to that.
And then it turns out she's having an affair with the pastor.
Right.
Okay.
Over the past 10 years.
So you go to the funeral.
Yeah.
And
we're looking
did he give anything away while he was in the funeral, or you just suspicious?
You get this feeling. There's something's not right. The way he's not looking at the casket. He's looking out in the audience. His entire, and sometimes you get that, but he didn't look at the casket, not once. And when he did, I think he caught himself and he looked out, he closed his eyes, and he looked back up. So he didn't want to see the casket. So in the weeks that follow, we're interviewing Teresa, and she finally admits to the whole conspiracy, to everything.
Okay.
She admits to everything. Well, he had come to town from, I believe, from Texas, and pretty soon after he got here, he started having an affair with his secretary. Well, his secretary was married, and her husband was a former Marine, and he was an insurance agent. And he also drove the church bus.
Okay.
So Teresa Stone, Randy Stone was her victim. So Teresa and Pastor Love kind of worked out a plan to eliminate both his wife and her husband. After 10 years of this affair, they decided, well, now's the time, we're just going to do it, get it done. Apparently, he was supposed to have taken his wife out to Colorado, and while on a vacation, she was going to fall off a cliff. And that was the plan, according to Teresa. That didn't happen. And also, Randy had about $800,000 life insurance policy that Pastor Love was looking to maybe get his hands on.
Yeah.
Because Randy had also discovered some indiscretions with the finances at the church. And Pastor Love thought, well, okay, this doesn't need to go public. Another motive for him. So Pastor Love is at Randy's house one night. Randy's not there, but Teresa is. So Teresa makes it available for him to get one of Randy's guns from the safe. And I remember asking her, did you give Pastor Love one of Randy's guns, the gun that he used to shoot your husband? He said, no. She said, he must have been looking over my shoulder when I was opening the safe, and that's how he got the gun. Pastor Love was establishing his alibi. So earlier that day, he had gone and he had officiated a funeral, which was about 40 minutes or so outside of town, and come back. He went sometime during the course of that afternoon or evening. He went to Randy's insurance agency there in Independence and shot and killed Randy Stone. By this time, we still don't have enough. By the time we got enough to bring in Pastor Love, he had already fled. He had already fled the state. He became a truck driver. He was driving out of Colorado or somewhere when he was apprehended months later, and he never gave a statement. He took a plea deal. Yeah, he was sentenced to life in prison, and Teresa was sentenced to 8 years in prison.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was an interesting turn of events. But once we put everything together, the notes that they'd shared, the cell phones that they'd had between the two of them, it was just little cheap phones that he bought for her and them to communicate with.
Yeah.
And the finances that were about to be exposed, the instructions there. So it was a challenging time. That was a very involved case, though.
Why did she break? Was she just didn't have it in her to keep that silent?
Didn't. It was the guilt.
Okay.
It was just eating her alive.
Yeah.
And then once she started talking, she didn't stop talking. She told us how Pastor Love told her that since in the Bible, God forgave David for killing Uriah and his indiscretions with Bathsheba, that it was going to be okay.
Oh, well.
And that, for her, that was
convenient.
Yeah, that was the golden ticket. She's like, okay.
But it didn't work.
It didn't work at all.
She ended up.
It didn't work at all. She told everything. There were letters.
Why did they go through with it when the pastor didn't throw his wife off a cliff?
That's one of the things that made her angry.
Okay.
Yeah. She was holding on to that.
So her spouse, they can murder.
My husband's dead. Your wife is not. I'm not sure you're really into this like you said you were. And so, once she started talking, another detective interviewed her for quite a few hours. I interviewed her for between 6 and 8 hours. And she talked a lot.
Yeah. Wow.
It took a while to get there, though. After the funeral, I'm not sure if it was a week or 2 weeks after the funeral that we got her back in.
Okay.
But
so multiple interviews,
right,
and days of work, but she did eventually start to budge.
She did. She did. And we always knew she would.
Yeah.
With the evidence that was, because she kept giving us more.
Yeah.
She's kept giving and giving and giving and thinking, though, well, maybe they're not going to really know what I'm giving them.
Yeah.
But everything that letters and notes that she'd shared with the pastor, we were able to retrieve during the course of a search warrant.
Yeah.
We got all those things.
Yeah.
So, but she took the time to explain everything.
Yeah. So you guys as a team went from just being suspicious of him to being really certain the more she gave.
Oh, yeah. And the key was just to make sure we had a rock solid case. And that was going to take a little time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately, by the time we did get a decent case, a rock solid case, he had already, like I said earlier, he had already fled the state. But you're not going to go too far.
No. Yeah, you can run, but you can't hide.
And he didn't. He didn't.
Huh.
In 2015, I was assigned a cold case homicide investigation that started in January 15th of 1980. At this time, the case was 35 years old and hadn't been solved, and we had not made a move towards any real suspects. And understanding that in 1980, anybody that is capable of the crime was considered a suspect because the terminology we used back in those days was different. And it was suspect meant just a general pool. Man, it could be this guy. Now, in today's world, if somebody's earned the title suspect, you have some things that are pointing you towards that person's direction. And I tell you this to tell you this, that over 35 years, the initial suspects all had to be fleshed out. And essentially, in my case, it was a woman who had been beaten to death and sexually abused. So anybody, any male in my city was a suspect. So when I get handed this case, I have 35 years of investigation that has compiled. And every time a new detective gets assigned, they make a new set of detective books. So there's a lot of missing reports or duplicative information. So I had to go through that and kind of eliminate that and really get down to the brass tacks as to what we have in this case. Well, between 2015 and 2021, I spent a lot of time clearing suspects in this case, and I use that term based on the 1980 standards, and could not get towards anybody that was looking good. And we probably started with 300 suspects in air quotes. Well, I employed some DNA stuff. I went to a lab and we got a phenotype made. And if you don't know, a phenotype is where you can take some DNA, give it to the lab, and the lab will say, this is what your person looks like. They got this hair color, this eye color, these amount of freckles. They're from this origin in the world, blah, blah, blah. So did that. Didn't really, it's a lead generator. We didn't come up with any leads. Did some genealogical DNA into the database, and there was no real hits. There were some distant hits. Imagine looking up into a sky full of stars. And when you do that genealogical DNA, you're looking for the brightest star, and that's where you start making your connections. Well, in my case, it was the faintest star. It was so far removed that it wasn't even worth focusing on because your eyes could barely see it. And that's what we were dealing with. Well, in about 2021, during a routine check of genealogical DNA, we identified one of two people as a suspect. And there's a lot of investigation that was done. And I think it's important to note that when I got handed this case in 2015, I met with the family. And I met with the only surviving family was two sisters of the deceased. Everybody else in the family had died. And when I met with the sisters, they had very little hope. This case has been ongoing for 35 years. Nobody solved it. And, we would love it to be solved, but we don't expect it to ever happen. And I promised those two ladies that day that I was going to solve their case, as I did with every single homicide victim family that I ever met. So in 2021, we get a hit on genealogical DNA, but it's still very, very distant. You can see the star, but you can't quite tell if it's a star or a satellite. It's kind of what we were looking at. But it was better than we ever had. So we fleshed that out and finally came up with one of two suspects. One guy lived in Florida. He was the owner of a yacht dealership. And the other guy lived in my backyard here in the Pacific Northwest. And the second guy lived about a mile from the crime scene and has always lived about a mile from the crime scene. So I really wanted to go see the guy in Florida. I wanted to take my partner and go on some boondoggle to Florida and find a yacht dealership that we can go out in. But when I started looking into the backgrounds, yacht guy had like a DUI 40 years ago. And the other guy has a long history of sexual abuse, rape, prostitution, kidnapping, all these charges. And I'm like, this looks viable. So as we dig into that, identify that gentleman as our suspect. That gentleman's wife has worked for local law enforcement for 25 years. He is in the community. He's a coach, a wrestling coach. He is just what appears to be a normal dude. So we started that investigation. Ultimately, we go out and we have to get a surreptitious DNA sample. So after multiple attempts, we finally do a surveillance on this guy while he's riding around on a bicycle. If you've never done a follow or surveillance at 7 miles an hour on a bicycle, it's very challenging. So we ultimately, during this bike trip, he starts chewing some gum. He stops at some point to overlook a river. He spits the gum out. He moves on. Our surveillance team stays with him while myself and another detective pick up the gum, send that into the lab, and as luck would have it, the DNA from the gum matches the DNA from the evidentiary swabs of our victim. And I should also note that in 1980, DNA wasn't a thing. DNA in law enforcement was not a viable tool, but these people swabbed the seminal fluid that was found inside of our victim, and they kept it and preserved it, which was just a complete godsend, because in 1994, when DNA started becoming a viable tool for law enforcement, we were able to submit that to the lab long before me getting the case, able to submit that to the lab and come up with a DNA profile for our suspect, which was super cool. So now we're going to match this DNA from the spearmint gum up to that sample. Sure enough, it's him. So we ultimately do a surveillance for an arrest team. When we traffic stop him, we light him up. He travels about a mile. And when he stops, the coolest thing, he stops about 150 feet from where he committed the original kidnapping and murder. He was literally at the same intersection. So we arrested him, brought him back. Ultimately, he, denied ever having sex with this person, denied any relationship, denied knowing her. At the time of the murder, he was 16 years old, and the victim was 19 years old. Denied having anything to do with her, showed him pictures, all of that. Once I told him that she had been murdered and that his DNA was inside of her, he decided that he didn't want to talk, but promised his family he was going to prison for the rest of his life. Through the court process, he was found guilty, and he's now serving the rest of his life in prison. And that was a great case to bring to closure because it affected so many people. Our community has been held captive by that case for 42 years by the time we got the conviction. And, the night of the murder, there were 7 different witnesses that drove by and saw this. And this victim ran out of the woods into traffic on a dark, stormy, snowy, cold night and threw herself in front of cars, waving her arms, covered in blood, trying to get attention. And the guy would grab her and bring her back into the woods. And she'd literally escape again in front of cars, and people would swerve around her. And she screamed, and somebody looked from the parking lot and saw the people in the woods, but thought it was a prank. So many people could have called or done something to prevent or stop or slow, or maybe, who knows what the outcome would have been, right? But they didn't. And in those days, there was no cell phone. So they're like, somebody else will do it. And they just moved on. And 42 years later in court, I got to meet these people for the first time, and the emotion they felt because of the survivor's guilt and what they made, what if, was really haunting them. But at the end of the day, it was amazing. And when I got to make that notification to the family, they had no idea this was coming. It was 9:00 at night. I go knock on their door, and I'm in plain clothes. They know me. I've got a badge. But I threw them off. They were stunned. And they didn't know that I was going to be showing up at their house at 9:00 at night. And my partner and I walk in, and I make that notification, and we all start crying. And, we're holding each other, and we're just bawling because of the emotions. And it was the most significant moment in my career.
I hope that you enjoyed those stories. Most of the anecdotes that the detectives are sharing are much shorter in length than that. It'll be very similar to the compilation episodes I put together for the patrol officers. But at the time of this recording, I am still doing these interviews with detectives from different places around the country. If you are interested in contributing to that, please contact me. If you want to nominate yourself or nominate somebody you know, especially if the person is a good storyteller and or they have a lot of wisdom to share, that's what I'm looking for. A great story's good, but I'm looking for a great story with wisdom to share with younger officers and detectives. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, let's pray for peace in our city.